there comes a moment when words burn and silence is no longer an option. Iran just answered Trump's strike with fire, not forgiveness. Diplomacy? Some say it died last night, but the real story, the one nobody's telling, is waiting at the end. And trust me, you'll want to hear it. There are actions in the grand theater of nations that act as accelerants, transforming simmering embers of distrust into infernos of open hostility. When one power, in this case the United States under the Trump administration, makes the decision to strike at the heart of another's most sensitive installations, its nuclear facilities, the response is rarely silence. It is more often fire. And so Iran fires back. Not with hesitant probes, but with the full fury of a nation feeling the sharp edge of violation, its missiles arcing through contested skies, its drones seeking out targets, a direct and unequivocal answer to the explosions that rocked its sovereign soil. But the impact transcends the immediate physical damage, the shattered infrastructure, the wounded. Something far more fundamental, more fragile, is also declared a casualty: diplomacy. For in the damning assessment of Iran's own foreign ministry, it was those very American strikes that blew up the painstaking, often precarious processes of dialogue, effectively torching the bridges of communication painstakingly constructed with European and other international partners. This is the stark equation now confronting a watching world. Surgical strikes met with retaliatory barrages, and the painstaking architecture of peace talks left smoldering in ruins, declared kaput by a leadership that feels aggression has voided all other options. The implications are profound, casting a long, ominous shadow over a region already saturated with distrust and paving a path toward an even more perilous and unpredictable future. Fiery rebuttal. The retaliation from Tehran was not merely threatened, it was enacted with a swiftness that underscored the depth of Iranian outrage. Following the strikes on its nuclear sites, locations like Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan, representing years of national endeavor and immense strategic significance, Iran's response was immediate and kinetic. Missile and drone attacks were launched against Israel, a key American ally and a participant in parallel strikes against Iranian military and governmental targets. Reports confirmed infrastructure damage in the heart of Tel Aviv, a bustling metropolis, alongside multiple injuries. This was Iran firing back in the most literal sense, demonstrating capability and a willingness to escalate in response to perceived existential threats. But the declared retaliation extended far beyond these initial volleys. Iranian parliamentary leaders and top military commanders issued a chilling vow for a proportionate response, a term laden with ominous potential in such a volatile context. More critically, they unfurled a potent threat. The United States could lose access to the Strait of Hormuz, that vital maritime choke point through which nearly a fifth of global oil shipments transit. The sheer audacity of threatening to disrupt such a critical artery of the world economy signals a willingness to engage in high-stakes brinkmanship, potentially crippling global energy supplies and inviting a massive international crisis. Furthermore, Tehran starkly declared all United States military bases across the entire Middle Eastern region as legitimate targets. This was not a nuanced diplomatic protest. It was a clear and unambiguous warning that Iran now considered itself in a state of open confrontation, prepared to strike at American assets wherever they could be reached, effectively transforming the regional landscape into a potential theater of widespread conflict. The message was clear: an attack on its core interests would not go unanswered and could indeed broaden into a conflagration that no party could easily control or contain. Broken dialogue. Perhaps as devastating as the physical exchange of fire was the pronouncement from Tehran that the very foundations of diplomatic engagement had been demolished. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, delivered this grim assessment with unvarnished candor. He stated that the American strikes, specifically those targeting Iranian nuclear facilities, had effectively blew up the ongoing delicate diplomatic overtures that had been carefully cultivated, particularly with European nations. These weren't just abstract discussions, they represented tangible efforts to find common ground, to de-escalate tensions that had been simmering for years, and to perhaps chart a course away from perpetual crisis. Araghchi squarely accused the United States of intentionally derailing this dialogue at a critical juncture, suggesting a deliberate sabotage of peaceful pathways. His words were not just an expression of anger, but a declaration of a fundamental policy shift. Diplomacy, he insisted, is now off the table. This public renunciation of negotiation, coming from a nation's chief diplomat, is a profound and dangerous development. It signals a loss of faith in peaceful resolution and a pivot towards a posture where military strength and retaliatory capability are seen as the primary, if not sole, guarantors of national security. When diplomatic channels are explicitly closed, the risk of miscalculations skyrockets. Without the established means to clarify intentions, to de-escalate unintended clashes, or to mediate disputes, adversaries are left to interpret each other's actions through the darkest possible lens, often assuming worst-case scenarios and responding in kind. The immediate casualty of this diplomatic rupture was the indefinite suspension of scheduled peace talks and high-level engagements. Iran made it clear that it must receive a response, implicitly a military one, or at least a significant concession from its adversaries, before it would even contemplate returning to any negotiating forum. This stance effectively reset Tehran to a military-centric posture, conditioning any future engagement on the cessation of strikes and a fundamental change in approach from Washington and its allies. The repercussions were felt acutely in European capitals, where leaders had invested significant political capital in trying to preserve the JCPOA nuclear deal and maintain open lines of communication with Iran. Their efforts were, in Tehran's view, rendered moot by the American actions. This creates a dangerous void. The United States' assertion of force had not only provoked a military retaliation, but had also, according to Iran, incinerated the very mechanisms designed to prevent such exchanges from spiraling out of control. The world was left to witness a scenario where the primary language spoken between key actors in a volatile region was no longer that of careful negotiation, but of missiles, threats, and ultimatums. This is the perilous landscape created when one side believes the other has unilaterally blown up the bridges to peace. Shifting alliances. In the wake of what it perceived as a fatal blow to diplomacy with Western powers, Iran demonstrably began to reinforce and seek out alternative strategic partnerships. The announcement that Foreign Minister Araghchi was scheduled for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow was a significant signal of this recalibration. Russia, itself contending with strained relations with the United States and Europe, represents a powerful potential counterweight and a sympathetic ear for an Iranian leadership feeling besieged. Such consultations likely explored avenues for deepened military and intelligence cooperation, strategies for circumventing economic sanctions, and coordinated diplomatic stances in international bodies like the United Nations Security Council, where Russia wields veto power. This turn towards Moscow is a classic response of a nation seeking to bolster its position when traditional alliances or avenues of engagement are perceived to be closed or hostile. Beyond Russia, Iran also reportedly received expressions of solidarity from China, another major global power with a vested interest in regional stability and a frequently critical view of American foreign policy interventions. While perhaps not offering direct military alliances, Chinese diplomatic and economic support can provide crucial lifelines for Iran as it navigates this period of intense pressure. This strategic reorientation was not limited to major state actors. Expressions of solidarity and potential coordination were also forthcoming from Iran's long-standing allies and proxies, including Hamas and the Houthi movement. For these groups, an existential threat to their primary patron in Tehran necessitates a closing of ranks. The United States and its allies, therefore, face a scenario where Iran's retaliation might not be confined to its own direct military actions, but could involve a coordinated or encouraged series of disruptive activities by these non-state actors across multiple flashpoints in the Middle East. This potential for proxy mobilization significantly complicates any response strategy and dramatically increases the risk of the conflict spreading in unpredictable ways. The wider international community, including the United Nations, the European Union, and numerous Arab states, watched these developments with mounting alarm. Strong cautions were issued from various capitals, warning against further escalation and highlighting the very real danger that the current crisis could spiral into a full-scale regional war, drawing in multiple actors and causing catastrophic human and economic consequences. The concern was palpable. The destruction of diplomatic channels was not just a bilateral issue between Washington and Tehran, but a precursor to a potentially much broader, more dangerous international confrontation with new and reinforced alignments shaping a more polarized and perilous global landscape. Hormuz pressure. The Iranian threat to potentially disrupt or even close the Strait of Hormuz represents a critical point of leverage and a source of profound international anxiety. This narrow waterway, a choke point less than 30 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, is more than just a geographical feature. It is an indispensable conduit for the global energy economy. Approximately 20% of the world's total oil consumption, along with vast quantities of liquefied natural gas, transits through Hormuz daily. Any significant disruption to this flow would have immediate and severe repercussions for global oil prices, potentially triggering an energy crisis that could cascade into a worldwide economic recession. Industries reliant on stable energy supplies would face turmoil, transportation costs would soar, and the economic well-being of nations far removed from the conflict zone would be directly impacted. This is precisely why Iran's warning resonates so powerfully. It is a threat that touches not just regional adversaries, but the economic stability of the entire interconnected world. For Tehran, faced with crippling sanctions and direct military strikes on its territory, the ability to menace Hormuz provides a potent, albeit perilous instrument of coercive diplomacy or, in a worst-case scenario, asymmetrical warfare. The declaration that all U.S. military bases in the region are considered legitimate targets further underscores the gravity of Iran's retaliatory posture. This expansive threat envelope means that American service members and assets across numerous allied Gulf states, as well as in Iraq and Afghanistan, are potentially at risk. It transforms the region into a broad potential battlefield, challenging American force protection measures and raising the specter of direct U.S.-Iran military clashes on multiple fronts. Such a widespread threat compels the United States to adopt a heightened state of alert, disperse assets, and reinforce defensive capabilities, all of which contribute to a climate of intensified military tension. The underlying message from Iran is clear. If its core interests, particularly its sovereign integrity and strategic assets like its nuclear program, are attacked, it possesses the means and the will to inflict significant pain in return, not just on its immediate adversaries, but on the broader international system. This Hormuz pressure, combined with the explicit targeting of U.S. bases, serves as a stark reminder that the consequences of the initial strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities are far from contained. They have, instead, unleashed a dynamic where Iran feels compelled to demonstrate its capacity for disruptive power. pushing the entire region closer to a precipice where miscalculation or further escalation could ignite a conflict with devastating and far-reaching global implications. The international community, especially nations heavily reliant on Middle Eastern energy, watches with bated breath, understanding that the rhetoric of retaliation could swiftly translate into tangible, economically shattering actions. The terrible beauty of diplomacy, however flawed and frustrating it may often seem, lies in its fundamental premise that words can be more powerful than weapons, that understanding can bridge divides wider than any ocean. When those channels are declared blown up, when dialogue is exchanged for declarations of legitimate targets, humanity treads on far more dangerous ground. The decision by any nation, particularly one as influential as the United States, to undertake actions that foreseeably lead to such a profound rupture carries with it a monumental responsibility, for it not only invites an immediate fiery response, but also diminishes the shared tools our world possesses to prevent descent into wider chaos. The path away from the abyss is paved not with more sophisticated weaponry or more devastating strikes, but with the courageous, often unglamorous, and consistently challenging work of rebuilding trust, reopening dialogue, and reaffirming a collective commitment to resolve conflicts through intellect and empathy rather than through the brutal calculus of force. When the dust settles from this latest violent exchange, and the immediate fear of missile strikes perhaps recedes, the most enduring damage may well be to the very idea that peaceful coexistence, however fraught, is achievable. The echoes of diplomacy blown up will linger, a somber testament to a moment when the world chose escalation over engagement, leaving behind a legacy of heightened distrust and a far more arduous road towards any semblance of lasting peace or stability.